It is setting it up. Here we go. We are live.
Okay. So we'll call to order the December 6th, 2023 meeting of the Lake Stevens Planning Commission. Do the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we'll do the roll call. Commissioner Jennifer Davis,
Here.
Commissioner Connor Davis. Here. Commissioner Janice Suxford,
Yes.
Commissioner Bruce Morton. Here. Commissioner Nathan Packard.
Here.
Commissioner Linda Holt.
Here.
And I am here. Which brings us to item 3 on the agenda, guest business. See no one in the audience. Do we have anyone online? Seeing
Oh,
none.
no, I do not.
Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to item 4, action items 4A, approval of the November 15th, 2023 minutes. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second. Has everybody had a chance to read? Are there any edits or suggestions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Brings us on to item 5, discussion items 5A, code cleanup work session, additions, revisions, and next steps with David Levitan. Great.
Oh, no. I'll actually keep it in the PDF version. So David Levitan, Senior Planner. So tonight we are going to be doing an update on the code cleanup. This was last before you on August 21st. I do have this pulled up in just as a PDF so that I can toggle between the presentation and then the materials, both the matrix and the strike through underline version of the code amendments. So as we're walking through the presentation, I'm going to be providing a summary kind of focused on the revisions and additions that have occurred since your last meeting on August 21st. If you have any questions or want to go and look at the specific language, don't be afraid to raise your hand or just say something, and I'm happy to toggle over to the meeting packet materials so we can walk through the language. Don't feel like you need to wait through the entire presentation. So yeah, there's a way to do full screen. I'm just trying to figure it out, but
Full screen.
yeah, on this, I'll just leave it this way. So just a little bit on the history. So this was initiated actually back in 2022. Kind of as primarily minor housekeeping. The scope of it is expanded a little bit, especially following the last legislative session in 2023. So the materials before you tonight that were which were previously shared in August do provide some code amendments to comply with some of the 2023 legislation related to middle housing and ADUs. We did get some good feedback from commissioners back on August 21st, which we've incorporated into the updated materials. And so that's shown both as a matrix that provides a summary of what is now, I believe, 26 amendments, as well as strike through underline language in its current iteration. So just a little bit of the highlights of your feedback on August 21st. A couple of the major ones that came up, Russ walked you through all of the amendments, which I'm happy to do tonight, but wanted to focus again, mostly on the new ones or the revised ones. There was a request related to a proposed amendment on lot status. We were trying to clarify some things, and I think when I watched the video, all I saw was like blank stares from several commissioners. So we tried to simplify the language to really indicate that this is intended to cover lots that have basically been integrated into a site with adjoining parcels. So once that has occurred, The purpose of that amendment, and with the simplified language, is to indicate that it has lost its lot status as an individual parcel or an individual lot. So we're hoping that that amendment, which is Amendment 20 in your package, is more streamlined and easier to follow. And again, on any of these, I'm happy to toggle over to the language, or we can do that kind of once we get through the presentation. There were some questions about some of the footnotes related to impervious surfaces. So Russ took the lead on that one, very knowledgeable on the code and trying to clarify project vesting and applicability of impervious surface regulations. So happy to address any comments or questions on that one. And probably the largest policy discussion and kind of the largest issue is, as far as substantive issue, was related to parking for accessory dwelling units. House Bill 1337 allows the city to require 2 parking spaces per ADU for lots that are over 6,000 square feet. There was feedback from commissioners both in favor and against that two spaces per lot. Some feeling that's kind of regardless of lot size, the impact of the ADU is going to be the same. So it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to have differing parking standards based on lot size. There were others that felt like that we should take advantage of the state granting us that local authority to allow up to 2 per ADU. We look back through some of the best practices, what some of the other cities have done, and we have changed that to basically have a standardized 1 parking space per ADU. So that's if somebody did 2 ADUs on 1 lot, they would be required to provide 2 additional parking spaces in addition to those 2 primary spaces that are required for the primary residence. So happy to discuss that more tonight, but that's one of the changes that's reflected in the updated materials in your packet tonight.
Pause here,
Yeah.
and that's consistent with our current regulations and parking table, so it really doesn't result in a change. The only change is the clarification of 1 per ADU.
And so that is Amendment 19. And so again, we're happy to discuss that one.
I had a quick question about that. So I was thinking of it, and I might not have done a close enough read. I was thinking of it in terms of number of parking spaces based on the size of the ADU. That was kind of the calculus I was making. And is the maximum size of an ADU 1,000 square feet under our code?
We're required to allow a maximum of 1,000 square feet. You can allow more, but basically you can't have a maximum that's less than 1,000 square feet.
Got it. Okay. So, because when I was thinking about what that would actually look like, 1,000 square feet could really accommodate 2 people comfortably. And so I'm curious about the analysis that went into the idea of only requiring one additional parking space for something that large on a lot. Is it kind of, when you're doing the cost benefit, is it, we want to make it possible to, we want to incentivize having ADUs to create higher density and help, meet our growth management goals, or?
And I think we were trying to simplify the code as much as possible. The HB 1337 that amended the Growth Management Act allows you to require more parking for larger lot sizes, but as far as I know, I don't think for larger ADU sizes. So we didn't want to create a situation where we said, if you have a lot size over 6,000 square feet and an ADU over 800 square feet, then you require 2. If you're a lot size over 6,000 square feet, but you're an ADU under 800 square feet, then you require 1, where we'd have this super
It's a strange
complicated
method
formula.
Yeah.
based on lot size, where it should have been based on bedroom count,
Got it. Okay.
which we've done for like apartments or other things. So it's a weird calculation that came out of the GMA, and David said, just to be sort of consistent and have it simple, match what we already have, just to stick with the 1 per unit. So
But-
Yeah, and
but
so
is
we-
that an option we can explore further? Because I do like Commissioner Davis have some real concerns about, larger ADUs and only having 1 parking spot, for a family of 2 or more who might live in there. And then kind of the parking spilling out into the neighborhood and becoming everyone else's problem. Do we have flexibility on that on the GMA?
I would say let us do a check in with Commerce to see if they would find that acceptable to have a substitution for lot size based on bedroom count. But I don't know if we have an option or not, but we can check and then report back.
Yeah.
Can we clarify again that the language around the size of the lot requiring the additional ADU, I'm sorry, requiring the extra additional parking spot? So is it over 6,000 square feet?
Oh, like, is it 6,001 versus 6,000?
Right.
Yeah, I believe that it's 6,000, but we can definitely clarify that as well. If we're going in that direction where we're going to distinguish between lot sizes. But yeah, as Russ mentioned, my understanding of 1337, to address Russ's point first, is that we wouldn't be able to replace it. I think we could do it on top of the lot size, but then it would probably create like 4 categories where you'd be factoring both the number of bedrooms and the lot size. So, what happened?
And
Somebody.
if I may, Connor Davis and I disagreed on this when we discussed this back in August. And it wasn't that either one of us didn't agree with the other. It's just that we were trying to come up with what was going to be best for clarity and the overall growth of the community. And I think what staff has landed on is very clear and very consistent. And if you are going to go an ADU path, this is where you're going, unless you want to ask for an exemption, some sort of mitigation, some sort of something that a lot review would trigger along the way as we're going. So to revise it and have different layers of and I'm pointing at you just because you were the last one to bring this up. We've brought it up many times. To revise this so that we had different layers of criteria is going to, I think, halt any and all ADU growth, instead of saying, here's what the plan is, here's what we can accept, and come to us if your lot size is enormous and you want to do this, then maybe there's an exception that can be made based on different mitigation things or some sort of short, I'm making stuff up now, but short platting or something that you could do that would make this different. I think what is now is clear, and what would be what would get us into the weeds is if we started to split it out.
Yeah, and so when you look at our current code, which obviously only allows for 1 ADU per lot, and requires just the 1 additional parking space for that ADU. When you factor in lots that are more likely to qualify for 2 ADUs, or they're likely to be larger, just because you're not even just dealing with the parking, you're dealing with impervious surfaces, you're dealing with larger lot size, you may be running up against your maximum impervious surface. So you're more likely to have a larger lot with more room for parking. So, the larger the lot size, even if it's not mandated by the city of Lake Stevens to have that second space per ADU, you're probably more likely to have more room for parking on a larger lot. And those are going to be the lots that are more likely to be able to accommodate 2 separate ADUs, just because you're going to need to have a larger lot size, especially if you have a relatively large home that's going to take up a good chunk of your maximum impervious surface area. Once you start adding in detached ADUs, you're going to, and the driveways and the drive aisles leading up to those, you're going to very quickly run in to some of those other development standards that kind of serve as proxies to this parking standard. So on that one, yeah, we'll be walking through that one again. So yeah, if you have any additional discussion related to ADUs, we're happy to talk about that. But just a reminder that there are the 4 categories. So category 1 in green in your matrix is housekeeping. So kind of deleting, relocating text, fixing references, the gender neutrality amendment that we had walked through last week. Category 2 is kind of more minor updates, just where there are 2 sections of code that have some inconsistencies and do a little higher level of interpretation than just a housekeeping amendment. Major updates would start to change the intent or really the structure. So ADUs, duplexes, things along those lines where there's been recent statutory changes. And then category 4 was back in October. Melissa Place had come before you related to the process code update. The direction from the planning commission, which was then supported by the city council a couple of weeks later, was to try to tackle some of the low hanging fruit related to the process code as part of this code cleanup package. So we've incorporated 3 of those. Some of them are pretty extensive, so I'm happy to answer any questions related to those. When Melissa came before you, she didn't have draft code language, so those amendments are new. So happy to focus on those because those are probably the most substantive changes. They deal with process and types of reviews. A couple of them are relatively straightforward, just making sure to list every individual type of land use application within our use table or our review table, our review process table. Others start to go into things like security mechanisms like bonds and things like that. So happy to answer any questions or try to clarify any of those topics.
Okay, I've got a question, and this is more of my ignorance than really of the changes. On page 23, on the table of townhomes within single family zones.
Page 23 of the packet.
Yeah.
Okay.
What does A mean?
A is for an accessory, or excuse me, an administrative conditional use permit.
Yeah, so because we didn't include all the sections.
Yeah.
Everything in that
Yeah.
section, that would be kind of higher up in the code.
The definition.
Okay. Yeah, some of the definitions of what the acronyms or what the symbols or letters mean.
So meaning that, so an A means that it's possible with certain exceptions or with like what?
So an administrative conditional use permit is a type 2. It's not a full CUP where you need to go through a type 3 process. It's a type 2 process. So it's still an administrative review by staff, but it's still, there's criteria that you need to meet and findings that you need to make. So it basically, it's kind of, there's permitted, then there's kind of an administratively conditionally permitted, and then above that is conditionally permitted where you need to go to the hearing examiner.
Okay, so it's like a slightly higher bar than P.
Correct. It's between P and C. So, yeah, no, that's,
Okay.
Yeah, if you.
I'm just looking forward to seeing that mobile home park on the lake.
Yeah, and so that's, it's basically intended to tackle items that don't warrant review by the hearing examiner while still having kind of conditions that exist that warrant a kind of a slightly higher level of discretion and slightly higher review that allows for public comment as well. So the difference between a type 1 and a type 2 is a type 2, there's still public notice sent out. There's the ability for public comments, but it doesn't involve a public hearing.
Okay. And the next one I got is on page 28, the table 14. In the lower right-hand cell, what does on mean? Or should that be no?
I don't know what happened there. So let's look at that one.
I'm guessing that means really no, meaning that there's no maximum for a single family residential as far as number of parking spots.
Either that or I was toggling around within the document and
Okay.
accidentally replaced some text. So we'll look at that one and make sure that it doesn't say on or no, because that doesn't seem consistent with the rest of the table.
And one other question about parking requirements. As we move towards more dense commercial areas, like on what we're planning on 91st Avenue, where the business is up at the street, are businesses that are like at the street, are they going to be required to have a minimum number of stalls for parking? Or does that parking have to be in the back? I don't understand, like, why would a business that is like at the street need to have any parking at all?
So within a commercial district, as far as the off-street parking requirements?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's just generally been, I don't know, Russ can maybe speak better to.
So yes, there are still parking requirements in commercial zones. We also have design guidelines that are separate from these that dictate
Mhm.
where the parking should take place, which gives a preference to structured parking to the side or behind.
Uh-huh.
And you do get some allowances for on-street parking if it's available,
Okay,
but not in every case.
okay. So like a small business, they'd be able to count like the street parking as part of their meeting that requirement, and meeting that minimum.
A portion of it, yes, they
Okay.
could.
All right.
Count off-site.
All right.
Yeah, and just while we're on this table, this is one of the amendments, but so that footnote, that new footnote one is basically trying to show the hierarchy of parking regulations, so. For most uses within the city, it's found within chapter 1472, our parking section. For areas within an adopted sub area, so 20th Street, Lake Stevens Center over by Frontier Village, and then downtown Lake Stevens. Those are generally controlled by chapter 1438, which is our sub area code. And then what this footnote is trying to say is that there are certain uses within certain adopted sub areas, most prominently here in the downtown zone. That have tables within the sub area plan that actually then slightly differ from even chapter 1438. And so this is meant to say that for sub areas, you would start with 1438. If it's not listed in 1438, you would then go to 1472. But if the sub area plan actually conflicts with 1438, that's actually higher up on the kind of hierarchy. So it goes sub area plan, then it goes chapter 1438, then it goes chapter 1472.
So like if a sub area plan has like lower minimums for parking, then that will.
Yeah, that
prevail.
would supersede 1438, and then the stuff within, basically, if you're in a sub area plan and chapter 1438 is silent, then you move down to chapter 1472. Basically, that's the way that the code is written now, and this is just adding an additional footnote because within the kind of the central business district here in downtown, there are a couple uses where the parking standards that were called out within the sub area plan are slightly different, just because the characteristics of downtown are a little bit different than 20th Street or Lake Stevens Center, which tend to have a little bit more availability of off-street parking and things along those lines. So the standards are a little bit different. So we just wanted to clarify that because people often don't think to look, if there are actually individual parking standards that are listed within the sub area plan. So are there any more kind of while we're in this document, or I'm happy to go back through? We also, if people just want to go into if they have them, there's not, maybe a ton of value. We summarize these within the staff report as well. I'm happy to continue through and just kind of provide a high level summary of all the amendments, at least the new and revised ones, or we can, again, as Commissioner Morton just did, feel free to just ask questions about any individual ones, but I'll go ahead.
David, if I may.
Yeah.
This isn't in the document, but it's been a request over and over again from people who've spoken to me, and it comes back to that parking.
Yeah.
And I'm having to read your lips, sorry. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to track what's going on. It's not you, it's
Upstairs.
festivities, which is all fine. But when you have parking in a residential area, but you have cars that are not moving, cars that are not licensed, cars that are not, we've had people that are incarcerated for 20 years that have left their car in their driveway. They're not coming back for it in a while, and it's been there. Is there anything that's going, and this wouldn't be this document, but anything with code enforcement that is being looked at by the city to help pull those cars out of driveways and streets so that it allows for additional parking of people that are actually coming and going?
Yes.
So
Go ahead, Russ.
that's covered in the criminal and traffic code. So abandoned cars on the public way become the responsibility of the police department. So a police report should be filed if
That's
there's,
still citizen initiated.
it's citizen initiated. We do have officers that patrol, but that is not their highest priority.
Right.
So I would report those, and they are going to be looking at the traffic code this year, next year, to make sure, like we're doing here, any conflicts are dealt with, but that doesn't become a role of code enforcement to do traffic enforcement. But if there are junk vehicles on lots under inappropriate conditions, aren't screened on lawns, then yeah, code enforcement
Okay,
can deal with those with the receipt of a complaint.
okay, I appreciate that. And if that could continue to be, I get asked that question a lot. And I see it a lot, so that makes a whole lot of sense. There was another, if I may,
Non-emergency 911.
I know, bless their hearts, they're just frustrated.
Yep.
And then the other one was just a little side note. It's early on in the packet, number 6, page number 6. We're just talking about the sign code. And years ago, signage became a huge deal, and I don't want to rehash that, but signage, whether it be temporary or semi-permanent or permanent, was in the crosshairs of a lot of people. Is what this is saying is that now this is going to come off of this document and be, again, a city staff member is going to monitor all of that signage? Is that what this boils down to? Is that,
Is that in the staff report? So
yeah,
at the last meeting, we had shared that there had been some discussion with the city council to evaluate some of the temporary non-commercial sign standards.
right?
We had looked at those, and now that we're through the second election cycle under those standards, our code enforcement has really stepped up. So that's still a conversation we need to have with the city council again and get their feedback after sort of 2 election cycles. But the first cycle, I think, was an education year. We really had great compliance and great enforcement this last cycle. So it seems like it's probably a non-issue. But again, we need to circle back with the city council on that one, because they were the ones that requested to evaluate that if any standards needed to be changed. But our initial discussion was a little ambiguous because what they would like to see done, would be difficult to apply objective standards to. So we have to
I-
continue that conversation.
I understand. And I would contest, however, that it's not just election season. So we have companies that are using our trees as billboards.
Yeah.
And I brought this up a couple years ago, that it happens to be roofing and
Yep.
recycling that are a lot of them. And so I don't want to seem biased, but there's a lot of clutter that isn't related to election season.
Yes, and I will say that if you look back a couple of years and look to now, our code enforcement officer does a fabulous job. That is part of his weekly round to do a sign cleanup. So yeah, there's still going to be clutter, but there's not nearly as much. And that is one of the proactive things that we continue to do, is
Awesome.
sign enforcement in the right of way.
Thank you for your response.
So I'm not going to spend much time on the housekeeping. Most of these, not a whole lot of these change other than some very minor refinements. Additional just basically things, areas where we found additional references to outdated zoning districts. A couple of new definitions that we added there in Amendment 1. Just some additional clarifying language down in Amendment 10 related to permissible landscape enhancements. And then just updated references. The one related to Amendment 12 was just meant to clarify within the permissible use table that the RA12 zone does not require a PRD or a planned residential development subdivision the way that the R4 and the R6 zones do. So that was the kind of the shifting around some of the footnotes so that it was clear that it just applied to those 2 zoning districts. There's already individual standards for townhomes within the RA12 zone, so it's just inferred that that's a permissible use. It doesn't make sense that if it's a outright permitted use that you would then need to get a PRD subdivision to allow for that. So that was it on category 1. Getting boisterous up there.
They're using the space appropriately.
Installation.
All from that direction.
Category 2, the minor updates. There are a couple new ones. We had found a section of the code where we needed to update. Basically, the city has adopted flexible categorical exemption thresholds above the standard categorical exemption thresholds at the state level. So instead of referencing that specific number, we just reference the section. So in case we adopt a different standard, we don't have to come back through and update that section of code. So we're trying to do that as much as possible. Just so we're not creating things that can become outdated and that are going to require a series of future code amendments. If we can just reference different sections, that's much less likely to create conflicts. I think we had talked about this a little bit or Nico and Russ had talked a little bit about it, just clarifying street side setbacks. We didn't want to have to create a new definition for street side setbacks, but if you're on a corner lot, basically your side yard, if it's up against a public street, even if say your setback in the underlying zoning district's setbacks, side yard setback is 5 feet. If you're up against a public street, that gets bumped up to 10 feet. So we just wanted to clarify that so people are aware, so they're not planning their development for 5-foot setbacks when they really need 10 feet on the corner lots. And then just a couple of additional new ones related to signage. Amendment 16, just providing a little bit more clarity on the definitions of main and secondary facades. And then, as I mentioned before on the parking, kind of establishing that hierarchy, especially within sub areas, just the applicability of parking regulations within sub areas, that it goes sub area plan, then chapter 1438, then chapter 1472. So I'm happy to look at any of those if there are any questions. Or else we can move on to category 3. So category 3 is a little bit of a mix of both additions and revisions. Again, kind of just as we went back through and did a larger review, there were some additional sections that we had missed, just as far as this was specifically for compliance with House Bill 1110. Where the city is no longer allowed to require a larger lot size for a duplex than it does for a detached single family home. So we had noticed that in chapter 1446, we were still requiring 125% of the minimum lot size in that zoning district. So that was just basically struck so that it no longer reads that way. As previously mentioned, that the amendment 19 related to parking for ADUs, we had reduced that to 1 parking space per ADU regardless of lot size. We previously talked about amendment 20 related to trying to simplify the language for lot status of lots that had basically lots that had previously kind of been combined or absorbed into existing development that included more than one kind of lot or parcel.
Let's pause there
Yeah.
and just do a check-in that the substitute language does read more clearly for the commission than the last version.
I appreciated that. I was the one that made the comment that it was, it read round and round. So that was nicely done. Yeah.
I found it to be more clear.
Absolutely.
But I'm glad that people appreciate that one.
It took 3.
You're doing a great job, David.
No.
Yeah, they seem to enjoy it up there. Amendment 21 is just including a couple of new terms and definitions related to adult family homes and in-home daycares that came out of the 2023 legislative session. So that's just compliance with state law.
I had a quick question about that one.
Yeah,
Part 2 in there shall be minimal, if any, change in the outside appearance of the residence. We're talking about adding signage, advertising, turning it into like, Cinderella's castle. What are the, there just seems really ambiguous
yeah, and so we
about
can,
the change in the outside appearance.
that was existing code language. I can let maybe.
No,
Russ-
go ahead.
Yeah, that was existing code language. I mean, the intent of these uses, they're in residential zoning districts is for them to maintain generally, the appearance of a residential structure so that it doesn't look just like a commercial building. We do have within our sign code that allows for home occupations like that, a certain amount of signage. So it doesn't prohibit signage, even if you're running a home, if you have a home occupation for a use other than a adult family home or an in-home daycare, you are allowed signage already. So it's not meant to prohibit things like signage, that it has no appearances of a business, but it's meant to basically blend in, you know, with the primary residential character of that district.
Okay.
I think the common types of minimal changes would be, you're gonna have to swap out the kind of door you have to provide ADA access. You might have to provide a ramp into the residence. You might have ingress, egress, exit, you know, signs. So there'd be some smaller, that hybrid of what looks like a business to, you know, residential.
Gotcha.
The adult family home on 91st is a great example of that, where they've stayed very much like the community. They fenced it, obviously, but it stayed very true to what the neighborhood already looked like when it converted.
Yeah, and unless they're building it new, I mean, a lot of these are converted, you know, primary single family residences. So they're not looking to create, you know, in general, not looking to create a use that really conflicts with the residential character. We just wanted to make sure that we had some language in there related to that. Amendment 22 is related to model homes. This language came from the building official. So model homes are basically depending, when you're creating a subdivision, depending on the size of your subdivision, you're allowed to have build a certain number of model homes before you get to final plat, before you have individual recorded lots. And a lot of times they're utilized for sales offices or things along those lines. So we were starting to run into situations where people were wanting to occupy those and kind of run the sales office at it, and they're not connected to utilities, or they haven't gone through all their inspections. They haven't been final. They have a temporary certificate of occupancy or don't have any level of certificate of occupancy. So just clarifying from a building code perspective what's needed to make sure that that's at a stage of development and inspection and permitting to accommodate even that temporary use before it becomes its, you know, main residential use once it's sold and occupied by a family. So that was the intent of Amendment 22. And then Amendment 23 was actually just striking that section. That was something as the city went through a series of annexations in the 2000s, especially, and into 2010, 2012. This section of code was added. There were a couple existing developments, multifamily residential developments within single family residential zones where in the past it was thought prudent to include this language. We've never had to utilize it. There's adequate language in other sections to deal with non-conforming uses. So we felt like this was just not necessary, so we might as well strike it. So that one is as simple as that.
David, will you move your microphone just a little bit closer to you, please?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then moving on to the last one, which is the process code updates, which Melissa Place had worked on.
Before we jump
yeah.
into those.
Yeah.
Do you want to mention the other couple of new ones that have popped up, or those later in your?
Yeah, those are later, but
we can hold them.
yeah, it's actually, well, these fall more within the first three categories. So I'll touch on these and then, well, that does make a difference. Touch on these and then go back to the process code. So just again, as we went through the code and just every day as we're covering the planning counter, we answer questions and look at sections of the code and just think, oh, that's not very clear, or that's outdated. So a couple of the ones that even we've come up with in the last few weeks to last few months, you know, there's going to be a need to replace references to the Snohomish Health District. That's now the Snohomish County Health Department. Russ had noted just today a section. It's actually kind of some of the dangers of when you link to a section of code and then maybe don't read that section of code, that it creates some inconsistencies. So as it relates to hazardous tree removal within critical areas, it references section 1476-120, which is specific to retention and protection of large trees. But within critical areas, we actually regulate all tree removal. It's not just for a certain size. So we wanted to strike the reference to that section and just establish standards as opposed to referencing a section that's not directly applicable. We issued our 60-day notice to the Department of Commerce, and we got some comments back from the Department of Natural Resources. They were very quick on their comments, and they had just requested that we include a reference to the WAC, Washington Administrative Code, related to the definition of geologically hazardous areas. So that's an easy enough fix, just to make sure that we're consistent with the state definition as well. And then I maybe let Russ talk about this one a little bit more. Just as we start to do project review and review proposals, there is some authority for the planning director within sub areas. So basically uses that are governed by Chapter 1438 of the code, to have some discretion for uses that aren't listed as a primary or secondary use within that, but would be basically would generally help to support a primary or a secondary use. So thinking about some potential code language to help clarify that point. Russ, is there anything that you wanted to add to that one?
Just a little bit. So we are trying to be sensitive to the conversations the Planning Commission and the City Council have had as they relate to storage uses. But we do continually get questions about storage uses in all of our commercial zones as a supplementary use. The fact being the economics of those facilities makes sense for the business owners sometimes to help their profit margin, but they're also not always desirable. So again, these questions keep coming up though from the public that, hey, we would like to do this. And it's gray in our sub-area regulations. They are not a defined use, and that's where David has suggested there is language in there that would allow me to determine if they're appropriate uses or not. And the clearest code path we've found is in secondary and ancillary uses, where based on the function in that purpose, we could do some links. And so the question arises, do we want to make some slight adjustments again to our storage code and make it explicit that if they occur within sub areas, that they're going to have further limitations than they would in non-sub areas? And so very easy link for a storage facility when it's tied to a mixed use development where they're going to have, 100 plus apartment units. That's a clear supportive role. So in that example, I have no problem making that link. But when they become a component of another retail use on a site, it's not as clear that there is a one-way connection to make that determination. So again, that's probably the distinction that we will want some guidance on. That again, it keeps coming up as a question from developers. And if we choose to allow that, we set really great regulations in place a year or two ago that defined the scale, the build out, and the look of these facilities. And so again, what would be different in sub areas, I think that right now we have a standard of 50% of the lot could be devoted to this use. That's probably too high. Again, if we want to think about them as allowed secondary uses. And so just establishing what this additional cap could look like if there's even an interest in doing that. So
Russ, is this designed then to be an interim, subject to the director's authority, something that'll come back to us in the future? Or
no, the director's authority is already built into the code. And I'm just explaining my thought process that when I go from it says the director gets to decide in uses that are not defined if they are appropriate uses. And then it provides another code section to help make that determination, which really talks about supporting secondary uses. So that's where I'm giving the example when it's a storage facility to support a mixed use building with a high residential unit count. Yeah, I can draw a straight line to that. If it's just another retail use on the site, that's a little bit dubious of drawing that line. And so it's asking the question, do we want to clarify that as a primary use in sub areas or a secondary use in sub areas? And if we do, should it have tighter controls than in non-sub areas.
I think I see where you're heading with that. And, you know, my concern always comes back to, you know, yes, right now, this is the director right now. What happens directors down the road?
Yep.
And their interpretation of it.
Yep.
And, you know, there is, I think, maybe a potential in the future for this commission to maybe revisit this and perhaps lay down some more clear rules, not to take authority away
No,
from
no.
you, but to make the requirements more clear to the public on what can and can't be built in these situations.
Which is really what we're asking for, if we want to clarify primary and secondary uses as it's specific to this use type, so.
Yeah, and I think the way that I have this written, it doesn't really, it's not very clear what the intent was. It's not just to grant authority, it's to potentially explore language to actually codify and clarify it in certain situations and what would be appropriate levels of storage facilities on a site that it definitely seems like it should be less than is allowed in commercial areas outside of sub areas. So this one maybe wasn't the clearest bullet point, but yeah, we're happy to follow up on that and to explore some potential options and share those with the commission.
The other idea would be, how much more land do we have that could be devoted to this? And what are we willing to give up for economic growth to put these in?
Yeah.
So where we've made a choice as a planning commission, in the past have been, different areas, different, lots that were kind of unbuildable for anything else but this, in my opinion, although some of them I just don't like, but whatever. But when it comes to putting in a storage, it's profitable because you don't have to have people there.
Yep.
And you don't have any employees. There's no one in and out. You are employing no one out of Lake Stevens. And all it's doing is taking up land that we can't use for any other business so that people can park their stuff there. And I understand storage is needed, but it's at the expense of, and that's always been my concern, is that it's at the expense of something else that could potentially go in there.
Yep.
Storage units is like, I've never seen that serves as a net benefit to a community whatsoever. And there are these conduits into Lake Stevens and storage unit on 204, storage unit coming onto 92, storage unit, off of, well, I guess Hartford Road, but yeah, these, they're not most aesthetically pleasing. I think it mentioned in a previous meeting, trying to figure out how to better consolidate or create setbacks where where storage units are further back off of the main road with mixed use up front. Yeah, I know that there was a permit at the end of Grade Road at 92. Is there any traction with that?
That one came in prior to the code amendment, and that one is
Okay.
that is fully permitted.
Okay, so they will be developing that lot as a storage unit.
Right, Lauren?
Potentially the ownership is in flux. So,
Okay,
and I believe they've asked for an extension, which they can do. So,
yeah, and that would be another artery into the city that would be welcome
Yes,
to Lake
all three
Stevens
of our
storage.
entrances
so
Right.
come solved.
again, then that's why we're bringing this to you, because it would be important then that we clearly say, yeah, since it's a gray area, let's clarify what that is and then put the cap on it that is appropriate.
Makes sense. Yeah.
So just moving back to category 4, which is the process code amendments. So there were 3 of them proposed. So they're to 1416A 180, which is related to security mechanisms. So this has been reviewed by the Public Works Director. It basically shifts some things around, some definitions, just as we look through it, kind of the way that it was categorized in the bullet points. It wasn't necessarily following any specific hierarchy. The terms were kind of jumping around. So we wanted to standardize the language a little bit, try to streamline the process for bonding, transition from performance bonds to maintenance bonds, and just try to simplify it as much as possible. So happy to walk through any of that code language there in Amendment 24. As I mentioned, Amendment 25 is simply trying to cover all the individual land use applications, just so within the basically the list of review types by land use application, that it doesn't leave open to interpretation things that are missing. So we just added things into the table that weren't currently in there, just to try to cover every single type of land use application. And then Amendment 26 is related to expirations for land use permits and also for subdivisions, to be consistent with state law. Try to simplify that and obviously be consistent with the RCW and the WAC, which we need to do. There are going to be some additional, the process code is going to continue to move on along as a standalone code amendment for some of the other items. There were some bills related to design review. There are some other bills related to statutory timelines that we have a little bit more time and a little bit more ability to take a more substantive look at some of those items. But again, these three amendments were meant to tackle some of the low hanging fruit where it's pretty easy to amend our existing code in a clear and effective manner. So with that, just a little bit on the recent steps. So we have filed our 60-day notice. So anytime, for those of you especially that are new, anytime you go to amend your code, you're required to file a notice with the Department of Commerce. You often, for kind of simpler code amendments, you can request what's called expedited review, which is a 14-day turnaround. In this case, especially because we're asking the state to review our codes related to implementation of House Bill 1110 and House Bill 1337, we filed a standard 60-day notice. And given that we're going to be pushing into January and then into February for the City Council public hearing, we had adequate time to do that. We're going to need to complete a SEPA checklist and issue a threshold determination. Some of these code amendments, there are some exemptions, some categorical exemptions for procedural updates within code amendments. The thought is that some of these are substantive enough in nature that they warrant a SEPA checklist to evaluate potential environmental impacts. So we'll be doing that in advance of the public hearings. And then we're going to be briefing the City Council. So we actually are going to be having a briefing with the City Council on January 9th on this. And then we're proposing to actually have the Planning Commission's joint meeting with the City Council on January 16th. So that's something we were going to bring up within the director's report. But that joint meeting is going to focus on the 2024 work plan, kind of a look back to the 2023 work program, and then just getting both boards, both bodies in the same room. And you're welcome to discuss any other topics as well. So that's looking a little bit at the future schedule related to this. So yeah, with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm happy to bring back up any of the individual code amendments if commissioners would like to discuss those in more detail.
And if I can, I'd like to step back to Amendment 26. That one probably needs the most amount of work still. So there is a potential that we'll pull that and wrap that into the larger process code amendment process. Really, the extension and expiration section of our code is one of the clunkiest ones. So really want to make sure what we do is streamlined and effective. And so that one might get stripped out of this still, as we were trying to decide what was minor and what was not. But we'll take another crack at it before we make that decision. But just wanted to throw that out to the group. If in the next iteration it's not there, that's kind of the why, if we think it needs a little bit more substantive work. But with that, back to David's question, just to open it up to the commission, just to get a check on where you're at with the progress of this project.
Is 26, well, we discussed this when Melissa was here, but is 26 part of the request of Olympia that we be exempted because we've been in front of some of this stuff?
That's a different issue, that would be related to some of our infill code, that when we
Got it.
go to
Got it.
next
Got it.
year's work program, which includes our housing amendments, that we will be asking the legislature to take a look at our current, or at least the Department of Commerce, to look at some of our current work for consistency.
So this is the one where permits can sit open forever or
Yes.
not. Okay, so,
Yes.
okay, that clarifies that a little bit. Yeah, that gets wonky real quick.
Questions from the commission? Thank you for putting that together. I especially appreciate the table and the citations, specifically when we have changes that are kind of dictates from Olympia. I found that to be very, very helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
And with no further questions on 5A, then that takes us to 5B, introduction of 2024 long-range planning work program. Director Wright.
Okay, thank you so much. As you all know, we put together an annual work program to sort of lay out what the long-range projects are. This usually covers state amendments, just practical amendments, et cetera. This year, as we go through that, we'll have a few carryovers. As you've already heard, the code cleanup that will go into the first quarter of 2024 a little bit to complete that. The review process code, likewise. We're still working on the solicitor's license. That's out of the Planning Commission's hand at this time, but we're waiting on some feedback from Washington State Patrol before we could move that one forward. The building code also, you had a cursory review of that. That's in the city council's hands, and we're waiting for the building code council to make their final determinations on when these new regulations become effective. So a few of the amendments this year were out of our hands, and so we know that we'll be carrying those forward and hopefully completing those into the first quarter next year. Mixed use regulations, though, that is a carryover that has been on your work program for this year that we had hoped to get to. We didn't. So we would like to bring that one back as early as we can. Next year, it shouldn't be a very substantive one, but it also had enough of a unique character to really not roll it into the code cleanup project. Our big project next year remains the completion of our comprehensive plan. You've seen that a few times and what's involved with that. And then as we go into zoning code amendments, there'll be a suite of things that we need to do to be compliant with the comprehensive plan. So we'll have our update to our transportation, our streets and sidewalks chapter. We will go through final land use zoning code for the Lake Stevens Industrial Center. One of the regulations coming out of the last legislative session, the House Bill 1293, sets new standards for design review, that all design review has to apply objective standards. We've implemented a couple of small things with the code cleanup project, but we need to do a pretty good code scrub and just look at everything to make sure that we have definitive objective standards if we apply design criteria. We've gone through the housing action plan this year. There will be an implementation phase, again, to make sure that in our land use code, we allow for appropriate types of housing, including supportive housing. So that will be a large group of work. And with that, we'll have to bring back the temporary encampment regulations back to the Planning Commission. Some of you were here 5 or 6 years ago when we worked through those the first time. And other implementation ones would be our park impact fees, potentially our traffic impact fees that probably won't affect you. And then our utility elements as we continue to look to the future when we're going to merge with the Lake Stevens Sewer District. We want to get prepared and make sure that our engineering standards and code standards are parallel with what that agency's design standards are. We don't know if we'll have any annexations, but there is still a desire on the city council's part to annex the remainder of our urban growth area. And we always accept the petition driven by citizens. So we will do a check-in with council on that and what their appetite is to move forward next year, or if that moves into future years. We will continue to support Snohomish County tomorrow. the Alliance for Affordable Housing, and various other groups across the county to make sure we have a regional presence and do our legislative review. So with that, I would just take any questions on the proposed work program. And again, you've heard that we'd like to schedule that joint meeting on the 16th. And that always gives you the opportunity to discuss the work program with the city council. And I will say, this is ambitious. There's a lot of stuff. There was a lot of stuff handed to us that we weren't expecting. And we know some of these things will have deadlines that will span 2024. So to complete this work list, we know this is more of an 18-month to 24-month work program, but we at least want to get them out there so we can get started on them, knowing that we will try to work towards the state deadlines for compliance on some of the various items.
Russ, when you went through this and was kind of assigning, what quarter these are in.
Yeah.
Did we take into account the relative timeliness requirements of some of these actions? Deadlines driven by law and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and most of these that are going to be most of the implementation tasks are going to take us well into 2025. So those did come later in the second half of the year, focusing on getting our actual comprehensive plan done first, and then trying to complete the outstanding tasks and some of the smaller tasks at the beginning of the year. So yes.
Okay. Yeah. And the reason I ask is only to make sure that we have enough time to discuss this as a commission, but also, to gain public input on many of these things. These are some fairly substantial changes that are going to be coming our way, and want to make sure that we're not rushing at the deadline.
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
Especially as you put it, this is substantially ambitious, but they always are.
Yeah, a number of them that are kind of comprehensive plan implementation items are specifically tied to the December 30, basically 6 months after the December 31st, 2024 update. So compliance with House Bill 1293, 1110, 1337, a number of those House and Senate bills are tied. They basically acknowledge that you're going to finish your comp plan, and then they give you another 6 months, or in some cases, slightly different timelines than that. So that's been factored in as well. And as Russ mentioned, that some of these are likely to extend into 2025, especially some of the larger chunks of work.
Thank you. Other comments from commissioners? Thank you for that.
Sure.
That moves us on to item 6 on the agenda, Commissioners' Report. It's an opportunity for commissioners to report on items germane to the work of the Planning Commission. We'll start tonight with Commissioner Huxford.
Thank you. I would just offer up thanks to you, Chair Dewar, for chairing our meetings this year. I think you did an excellent job and kept both the public and the Planning Commission on task. And I appreciate all the work that you've done. Thanks.
2 items. So one, just wanted to go back to a comment that happened last time as we talked a little bit about public transportation. I had specifically made a comment about, improving opportunities for connections to Everett, things like that. And I think the response had come back of something to the effect of, well, that's kind of outside of our control. There's not much we can do there. I guess the more I've thought about that, I've been a little bit concerned by that comment. I get that it's not totally in our hands, but it seems inappropriate for just us to say, there's nothing we can do, right? As opposed to trying to engage with WashDOT or Sound Transit or whatever and find productive solutions that we can propose or engage or collaborate or something like that. So I don't know what that looks like. I just, the idea of, hey, there's nothing we can do there seemed insufficient. Second item, I have a friend who recently built a deck. They have lakefront property and they needed to replace their dock, not their deck, their dock. And they were told by a lot of people, hey, just do it. Don't tell anybody, right? But they felt like they should do the right thing and go through the city processes, get the permits, etc. Ultimately, it was a nightmare for them. The process took forever. They never really knew what the real process was. They couldn't get a straight answer from the city. It was go here, you know, that website was ambiguous, go there, that was difficult. Anyways, long story short, it was very, very complicated. And they wish after the fact that they had just done it, right? And ultimately the point is, right, we don't want that to happen. If we're going to encourage people to follow processes, we should make it as clean and simple as possible. And I haven't gone through that. I don't know, you know, what the real complications were, but there was clearly a challenge there. And we need to just at least go back and review those processes and see what may be problematic and do our best to simplify and clean those up so that we're encouraging people to follow them rather than go around them.
Thank you. Commissioner Morton.
I have nothing. I'm good.
Nothing for me.
No, I don't have anything.
Commissioner Hibbs.
Yeah, just my family and I, we've gone to the Sunset Beach Park several times, and just again, I love that addition to our parks. On the note of parks, I know I bring this up time and time again. I host a weekend running club now, in addition to weekday running clubs for students at North Lake Middle School. As a city, we've got to figure out how to provide a safe be it a crosswalk to connect the Centennial Trail to Lake Stevens Community Park. I know that there's some gray area right there. It's county property. There's like a little sliver of what is Lake Stevens. There's a baseball fields that are across from the community park. But just to make sure that we're providing a safe, it's the second largest park, I believe, in our area here. Maybe even the largest, and certainly one of the most highly trafficked, just to make sure that we have safe crosswalks to head over there. We're basically just playing Frogger. And when traffic picks up in the afternoon, especially later in the afternoon when it's dimly lit at this time of the year, it's really practical for the city to perhaps partner with the county to get something done. Also, just seeing kiddos, I teach at North Lake Middle School. Seeing kiddos try to cross the street when we don't have sidewalks, say on 20th Street here. The north side of 20th Street, there's no contiguous sidewalk from the north side to be able to make their way west towards Mount Pilchuck Elementary or North Lake Middle School. So students need to cross over 20th Street to then go into downtown, to then use the crosswalks to then go on the north side to access. There are flagged crosswalks at a couple of the intersections. There is not one at 127th. And I saw 5 cars drive past a 11-year-old kid who's trying to cross the street. We've got to figure that out. I came from an area, I moved here 6 years ago from an area that was incredibly pedestrian and bike friendly. I don't see that here. It's really frustrating as a parent of young kids that I truly don't feel like it's safe for the kids to go out and cross any major intersection. We've talked about some of the improvements that were made. WashDOT took on the roundabouts on Highway 9. There's zero way that anybody is going to cross over as a pedestrian Highway 9 Frontier Heights to the east side of Highway 9 without just literally. It's really unfortunate. The city needs to incorporate better infrastructure to meet the needs of pedestrians rather than just strictly motorists. More cheap flags and visible crosswalks is a start. Downtown Lake Stevens still has not been painted. The crosswalk there, the crosswalk's right there. There are 2 visible ribbons, if you will. The rest of them they've been eroded over time. So at least at the main intersection of our downtown, to make sure that we have visible crosswalks for kids, for pedestrians to utilize. That's it.
Okay, thank you. And as this is our last meeting for 2023, I wanted to thank the commission for all their work. I know, we don't get paid, so we're all here because we want to help the city grow and improve and have vision. I also wanted to thank the work of Russ and his staff for keeping us well informed, putting up with our questions and their patience with me and everyone else. So thank you for that, and I look forward to 2024. And so with that, we'll go on to item 7, planning director's report.
Okay, I don't have a specific report tonight. I would encourage all of you to start thinking about who would like to serve as the chair and vice chair going into next year. So that will be one of your agenda items in January. We are considering canceling your first meeting in January, so we can hold the joint meeting, and then probably the second meeting is when we would like to target the code cleanup for public hearing, if you think that that project is far enough along. And those are kind of the next couple of dates that we have in mind for you. Otherwise, open to any questions from the commission tonight.
So just to confirm, we're not having a meeting on January 3rd,
Correct.
but we are having a meeting on January 17th.
16th, I believe, is.
16th for the joint meeting
Oh,
and then 17th for your
Oh, it
your
would be back
planning
to back.
commission.
huh?
Yeah, so
Okay,
it'd be,
so we will have a planning commission on the 17th, but we're doing a joint meeting on the 16th.
Yeah.
Let us look at that. If there's a preference not to have back-to-back nights, that's a big commitment.
there's still the opportunity to have that joint meeting on the 9th. We had proposed scheduling that way so that we could have the city council look at the code cleanup stuff on the 9th before we had the public hearing with you the following week. But I can talk to the city clerk. I believe that January 9th is not super full, so the council may be able to accommodate both the joint meeting and kind of the work session on the code cleanup on the same date on the 9th, and then that wouldn't require you to have back-to-back nights for meetings. You could potentially have that joint meeting on the 9th and then your planning commission meeting on the 17th.
But then we still are joining on the 16th.
No, so if we are able to hold the joint meeting on the 9th, that would replace the joint meeting on the 16th. So if there's a preference from commissioners to try to have that joint meeting on the 9th instead of the 16th, I can work with the city clerk to do that. So it's kind of at your discretion. Would you rather have them back to back in the same week and knock out basically all your commitments in the span of 2 days? Or would you rather spread out those meetings over 2 weeks?
All right, so just to confirm, planning commission meeting for sure on the 17th.
Correct.
And then now we just need to decide, do we want to join the city council on the 9th or the 16th?
Correct.
So what does the group want to do?
Preference for a
Well, I am not going to come to planning commission on my birthday, so I will not be here on the 17th. Thank you. I don't get paid. I just heard from Chair Dewar, so I will be absent on the 17th.
And I'm out of office, so out of state for business the week of the 8th through the 12th. So flip coin either way.
I can do whatever. I'm fine.
I'm also gonna be out of state taking care of my mom who's having surgery, so I will be attending via Zoom.
And I'm fine with the 9th or the 16th.
I'd be running late, likely to either of those. I coach basketball also at the middle school, so. Yeah, I couldn't.
Well, it sounds like we kind of have a kind of message for you on that. Could go either way. Why don't we see what the council can slip into the agenda that may play into it, and then maybe
And then you'll let us know
Yeah,
whether
maybe
we're
we can
doing the
go
9th
from
or
there.
the 16th.
Yeah, so we still have some time on that. It was just the sequencing. We wanted to try to get the code cleanup there on the 9th in advance of your public hearing on the 17th, so we could incorporate any feedback from the city council in advance of that planning commission public hearing. And for Commissioner Connor Davis, yeah, we can also work with them as far as within that meeting date, scheduling it potentially later in the, I don't know what time you get done, but we can try to work.
17th, I'm good. It's 9th.
Yeah, the 9th and the 16th. I don't know what time you get done, but we could try to have the agenda item a little bit later in the agenda as needed. Yeah, so we'll work out those logistics. We can do that by
And
email.
then you'll let us know like in a week.
Yeah, I'll check in with them tomorrow
Okay.
just to see kind of what it's looking like. But I spoke to the city clerk, Chellen, earlier today, and she said both of the dates are pretty much empty. Everybody's trying to get their stuff on that last meeting in December, and that's kind of opened up the meetings in January.
Got it.
okay. And that brings us then to item 8 on the agenda, adjournment for the last meeting for 2023.
So moved.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.